So thank you to Number 5 Chambers for providing the venue and putting the food on. My name is Michael Cotter. I'm a solicitor at Regulatory Legal Solicitors. I'm representing Mr Bruce Baker, Mr Dave Curran and Mr Jim Evans in their proceedings against the British Boxing Board of Control. To my left is Mr Baker, to my extreme left is Mr Evans. And the purpose for asking you to come down today is to confirm that proceedings are going to be issued against the British Boxing Board of Control. This is not a decision taken lightly by any of the parties. However, when faced with a set of circumstances that ultimately curtail and restrain the sport that they love, and ultimately put the people who they work for and work with in boxing in a position whereby they have no choice but to take this stand, not just the two individuals at the top table here, but fighters, trainers, seconds and others involved in boxing. These proceedings come on the back of a set of unmeritorious, we would say, disciplinary proceedings that were brought by the board against not only Mr Baker and Mr Evans and Mr Curran, but others as well. The allegations that the board will face will be known to the board. These proceedings arrive after a long and winding road that started with the David Hay and Derek Chisora fight at Upton Park in the summer of 2012. And whatever anyone says about how that fight was arrived at, the end result was certainly one which was enjoyed by fans, spectators and the industry alike. In addition to this, the proceedings are issued amongst a backdrop of many disgruntled licence holders, and they are issued in turn as well to protect the interests of those who have invested time into professional boxing. All on this top table, and I include myself in this, have respect for what the British Boxing Board of Control are. That much is clear. However, they are a company which has sought to regulate professional boxing with a degree of success over many years. And admittedly, like all organisations, there have been ups and downs. However, nobody on this table is looking to diminish the work that they've done. That being said, the disagreement stems from the fact that the board itself is acting as if it has a de facto right over Britain, as if it's their exclusive territory. And this is plainly not the case, and nor could it be for a private company limited by guarantee. In addition, it doesn't work in accordance with EU rules and competition law, and when one considers that their behaviour, in particular with regard to most publicly the Derek Chisora and David Hay fight, not many of you will need to cast your minds back too far to remember that the position of the board when the fight was announced was effectively to act as judge, jury and executioner, warning licence holders before the event had even taken place that there would be severe consequences should they appear on another regulated show. I'm afraid to say that whilst the David Hay and Derek Chisora fight probably quite rightly took the limelight, the behaviour of the board thereby threatening licence holders with consequences for merely doing nothing more than exercising their free rights hasn't changed. There's probably a fairly obvious question that will come from this side of the room, and that's, well, why not get a licence elsewhere if you're unhappy with the board? That's probably a very valid question. But here ultimately the problem lies. The restrictive and prohibitive nature of the board has allowed them to create ultimately in the market. There is only one player in town. If you want to be a professional boxer in Britain, you have to engage with the British Boxing Board of Control. And because of that, you have no practical real alternative. Now, the danger of a one-party operation in any market is that there's nobody then to keep them in line. And when there is only one party who ultimately has the say as to how matters and things should go, then this can only ensure that nobody's keeping in check whether the service they're providing their end users, i.e. their licence holders, is being kept in check. It's impossible to think of a single scenario in the real world where the failure to create competition in a marketplace hasn't benefited the end users. And what I mean by that is the end users ultimately are the licence holders of the board. This is their sport as much as it is the powers that be. And if you look at any market that's been opened, it's quite clear that competition is healthy. It will make sure that practices of the board are brought into check. It will make sure that the service that the board are providing is ultimately going to be better but will also allow other individuals who want to participate in the sport of professional boxing in Britain to be in a position where they have an alternative. And in having an alternative, that means as well that the board themselves will perhaps need to shape up. Because if they don't, they'll find themselves like any other private business, struggling and dwarfed. These proceedings do not just have the opportunity to better the position of the claimants, although of course it is the case that the people on the claim form will benefit should we be successful, as we believe they will be. The involvement of other regulatory bodies in the sport of boxing on these shores will improve the service offered to those in boxing. For every Froch v Groves at Wembley, there are hundreds of small hall shows up and down the land which are the lifeblood of British boxing. And the point takes me full circle as to where I started. The claimants taking a stand offer a service and ultimately their expertise to young hopefuls, future world champions, ex-champions, all away commonly from the eyes of the TV and the media. When one considers that the people at the bottom of this claim form ultimately have given their life to boxing for many, many decades, any thoughts of mischief that people might put forward must be disregarded. These people clearly love boxing and love being involved in the world of boxing. You can ask anyone connected to them and to that end. What I now propose is to allow Mr. Baker to say a few words with regard to these proceedings, and then we'll do a brief question and answer session afterwards, which can just carry on for as long as it needs to. Bruce?
I was just going to read a statement. It gives me no pleasure to issue proceedings against the Board of Control. However, I believe in the market, in the free market and competition. The Board of Control have no statutory right to be a monopoly in the UK. Board of Control licence holders, however, do have a statutory right to offer their goods and services to anybody they choose to work with legally in the single market. The rules of the Boxing Board of Control need to reflect UK and European laws. At present they don't, and they actively use their rules to penalise licence holders who look to work with alternative legal governing bodies. We have asked them to look at their rules and make them compliant with EU and English competition laws, and they have ignored our requests. We have no other choice than to take the matter to law, as it is, in the final analysis, it is only the courts that can decide what is legal and what is unlawful. That's it.
Jim, are you okay? Do you want to say anything, or are you okay?
No, I'm John Whitney.
Fine.
I'll get my head on.
If anyone's got any questions, then we'll happily take them. We can either stay here or we can do it a little bit more intimately, but this seems to work, so let's just carry on as we are.
What are the actual details of the proceedings? There hasn't been really anything said about that. What are you looking to achieve?
Yeah, well, there's two in one there. So what we're looking to achieve ultimately is recognition that the rules that the British Boxing Board of Control have looked to put in place, namely 412 and 515 of the Boxing Board of Control Regulation Rulebook, I can show you that in a moment if needs be, are ultimately unlawful. Yeah, and are looking to restrain the trade of people being able to participate in boxing promotions arranged by other regulatory bodies. The end result, as far as we will see it, is ultimately declaration that the board's rules are unlawful, and therefore the board are not able to restrain the trade of the claimants on the claim form. That will of course have a knock-on impact, which will then give the green light to other regulatory bodies, who then will be able to put on shows in this country and involve British licence holders, British Boxing Board of Control licence holders on their shows, without fear of the same nonsense that we've seen historically, where the boards start making decisions without even taking the facts before them in the first instance.
Would this go back to making where the board allow the members to actually vote? Because one of the big problems is most of these issues have occurred since the board took away the members' voting rights.
Well, these proceedings themselves won't do that, of course, because that's not a part of what these proceedings are. But to the backdrop of these proceedings are a very disgruntled number of licence holders who hold a lot of influence in the sport of British boxing. And what, of course, we're inviting the board to do is to ultimately revolutionise where they are. And if there is a licensing authority and a regulatory body that people want to work with, that is offering the same sort of voting rights that historically licence holders used to have, well then you might see that people start using them instead. So
Yeah.
what this will do is open up the markets, that there will be other people, other regulatory bodies that will offer what the board used to offer, where people felt like they had a degree of control over the sport they were involved in. And then the board need to be reactive to that. If the board carry on as they are today, and other bodies come in and seek to do other things which are going to end up being beneficial, the board are going to struggle to carry on in their dominant position.
Makes sense. And the other thing that I'd say on that, one thing that's come out of this, I know it's not necessarily part of the case, but the British Boxing Board of Control are just a licensing authority. They do not employ boxers, they do not employ the trainers, they do not employ the managers, they do not employ the promoters. How have they been able to get away for so long with restricting people, you know, by not allowing them, say, to fight on Bruce's show or my show, sanctioned by me? How can they get away with that when they don't employ the people?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is nobody's properly challenged them. And the reason why nobody's properly challenged them is because nobody's had the real nous to do so. That now changes today and goes back to the David Hay and Derek Chisora fight, where there were the first murmurings of discontent, arguably. And the board themselves, as we know, all too familiarly, unfortunately have been putting people in a position whereby they feel handicapped to only but choose the board, and have been met with threats and called up before area councils and fined on what we would say are potentially on meritorious basis.
There is a fear within the sport that this action will damage the sport. What are your views on the effect that this action would have? Can it damage the sport? Will it damage the sport?
I don't see how it can, because all you're going to be inviting into this jurisdiction are regulatory bodies that have proven themselves elsewhere across Europe. You will give the ability for people who wish to put on boxing promotions to choose what regulatory body they wish to go with, and any regulatory body that wants to continue having the credence as a regulatory body throughout Europe will in turn have to abide by a very similar set of, and this is one of the problems in boxing, there are no minimum standards. But at the same time, those regulatory bodies that people will be engaging with will ensure as a priority that you've got safety at the top, fair promotions, competitive matches, and ultimately providing a service that not only the licensees want, but the end user, i.e. the fans, want. There are far too many shows in this country which are entertained by far too few people. It is very difficult for people on the lower rung of the sport, with the greatest of respect, to make money. And bringing in a more competitive market will ensure that there are more people trying to offer a service. That service in turn will be different, but there will be core familiarities and similarities throughout.
That, the corollary of what you say, if you like, and something you mentioned being at the forefront, safety, has been said that one of the issues that will be used to defend against this action, or is being used by parties to say that this is incorrect, and this is wrong, and this will damage the sport, is that the board has been, and I certainly take my hat off to them in this regard, at the forefront of safety and medical regulation of the sport. And one of the fears, I think those of us within the sport, those of us in the media, and most regulatory bodies have, is that will this damage potentially the safety of the boxers, which obviously are of paramount importance?
Again, I don't see how it can. I have to be slightly careful because, of course, I'm not acting for new regulatory bodies that will be able to enter into this market. But all I can say in that regard is German Boxing Association run hundreds of shows across Europe. Look how successful some of the big promotions are that go on across Europe with Sauerland and others. These people know how to run boxing. They know how to run boxing in a safe manner, in an efficient manner. And all regulatory bodies have been in a position whereby there have been ups and downs. Even the board themselves will recognise that. But ultimately, there seems to be, whether written or otherwise, a minimum set of standards that are expected with regard to how boxing promotions should be run safely. And it would not be of a surprise to many in this room if I was to tell you that the vast majority of European regulatory bodies have taken the lead from the board. So the outsider looking in, into the boxer competing, into the manager putting his fighter before the promotion, you wouldn't know any different, and safety will always be a paramount.
Surely if you open the door to one body, GBA is someone you've just used as an example, and their safety record's exemplary, but not every body's going to be as stringent on safety standards as them.
Of course, but then
if you let one in, surely you have to let them all in.
Yeah. When you open something to competition, you get good competition and bad competition. But eventually, competition eliminates the bad competition.
And that would be, in some respects, the job of the people like yourselves to ensure that those regulatory bodies that are failing short are reported on, as they would be.
But it is a risk in the short term, surely.
No more
in the teething period, for example.
No more.
Until the bad competition's eliminated, as Bruce says.
Yeah, but in professional boxing, there is a minimum standard for medicals and the
It's not a written
supervision.
standard, is it?
Pardon?
It's not a written standard.
Yes, it is.
Why who?
Is it the Europe? There's all the governing bodies. Was the uniform rules of boxing.
But
For
is there
professional
anything to
boxing.
compel a new body that comes in, a new
Well, no.
regulatory body to adhere to those guidelines?
If it doesn't adhere to those standards, it's not professional boxing.
I think it's fair to say as well that any new regulatory body that came into the marketplace that was looking to put on a practice that was unsafe, managers and fighters wouldn't go with it. Simple as that. Because ultimately, it is them who are putting themselves at risk when they go through the ring. And if you have a regulatory body that disregards safety to the point whereby, let's take it to the extreme, there's no ambulances, there's no doctors, nobody's going to use them because there's no insurance policy that's covering them in the event that something went wrong. Boxing differs from other sports because, of course, the nature of what you're undertaking is to ultimately inflict pain on your opponent. Let's be clear, that is what boxing is. But at the end of the day, if you're going to look to promote a event in this country and you want to be the regulatory body in this country, then you're going to have to offer something that entices people to your service. And if one of your headlines is, we're really lax on the medicals, it's not going to happen.
Can add to that angle as well is nobody's going to, I wouldn't think in the UK, you've got to have the same sort of standards minimum. Go with the British Boxing Board of Control, they're one of the few in Europe that actually has insurance for the boxers. Both GBA, which Bruce is organised, I know he's got insurance for the boxers, the same as NBC does. I don't think any organisation could even begin to establish themselves in the UK unless they've got the same minimum standards of having the insurance available and the medical standards.
I think you're right, and it's not for me to say, but I'd rightly
I can't
expect
see
anybody
anything to do with
who
it.
sought to put on an event of that kind to be handed out a thing to put it on, because
I think
you just wouldn't do
seems
it.
to be becoming a bit of a discussion, but Danny is answering your sort of point. Remembering that unlicensed boxing is not illegal.
No.
So there is today a thriving unlicensed market with no medicals whatsoever. And that boxing or fighting is not illegal. The issue really here is the transference of people's abilities to function in several different regulatory bodies. And I don't know, and I'm just speaking from, and this is nothing from what I mean from the top of the table, but from my perspective, I don't think there'd be an issue if a regulatory body, so if a boxer asked, say, from the GBA to box on a British Boxing Board of Control show, let's use it the other way round. If the boxer, if the GBA said, well, we're not keen for you, we will not give that permission on the basis that they don't require brain scans, I don't think there would be an issue. The issue here is that unnecessary preventative measures are put in place for boxers to fight.
Yeah, no, I understand the distinction, but once you allow that competition in, there's nothing to compel people to adhere to those.
Well, there is if they want to fight on the other shows. If the regulatory bodies have a set of rules that are sort of acceptable to each other.
We'll find that out as they
I think you're right. That will be found out in time. Any regulatory body that wants to continue will have to adhere. If they want to make any money, they certainly will have to adhere, because otherwise they'll be handed out and that'll be that.
Has it been suggested that competitors should be prejudged before they're put into action? According to this, there should be no competition, because you never know what competition the competitors are going to do.
Well, that's very true, and that's what that is. I mean, that is absolutely the case.
Surely people must wait, and if they see something wrong, then by Boxing News, for example, can make a headline.
And that's the point. That's the point exactly. Any bad practice will rightly be routed out by the people who want to be involved in professional boxing.
To be fair,
Hold on. Yeah.
Although,
to be fair, I think if we're talking about safety of human beings, life and death potentially in a boxing ring, I don't think there's anything wrong with prevention over cure. I think once a boxer's seriously injured, it's too late, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think that's a bit unfair.
Yeah, and well,
it's not unfair to say.
when I,
It's not unfair to test people's safety standards
No.
before they operate in this country, is it?
No, it is,
No,
no,
but-
you're right, it isn't.
but it's not a legal requirement,
No, it's not. But
unfortunately.
this is kind of the point I'm
Yeah.
making about other bodies coming in. It's not a legal
But
requirement.
there are other bodies here now who run what we call unlicensed boxing that don't have any medicals and at all. They just don't have a medical. They don't have an eye test or an ABA style medical, if you like, let alone a brain scan.
So
Do-
if this was successful, would there be anything to stop people like that calling their show professional boxing?
Yes.
And what would that be?
Well, because they wouldn't be with a.
Yeah, but there's no legal requirement to say they can't call it. If we
They
say
can call it what they like,
Actually,
but
I think there is you've got the ABC. I mean, I know the ABC's mainly American, but you've still got those, but they can, yeah, but it should be spread out further.
It
Maybe
should
everyone
be,
should
yeah,
take
we
on the
can talk about
ABC
what should
rules
be.
and spread it out.
I think ultimately the point that you made, Danny's right. Of course, anyone can come into the market, but that is the same in anything. People could build cars which have no steering wheels. Nobody would buy them. There will inevitably. I would be surprised, but then when you open up the market, anything can happen. I would be surprised if somebody came to these shores wanting to be involved in the sport of professional boxing with an intention to deliberately put on an unsafe show. The organisations that we would imagine are going to want to start using these shores in light of what may happen should we be successful, as we believe we will be, are already established brands and regulatory bodies in other parts of Europe who have ran many, many shows without any issues. I say that, the caveat being there will always be issues in boxing because it's boxing.
I mean, there's 5 governing bodies working in Europe that operate. They all operate in each other's territories. Sauerland use Austria, in Germany and Denmark. The GBA run shows throughout Europe. The BDB, who is the governing body that the border control recognise in Germany, is now the smallest governing body through competition. Luxembourg operate in Germany. There's 5 governing bodies, and it hasn't. What you're describing hasn't happened.
But that is only 5, isn't it? So far, we're talking about
No,
opening the
no,
market
that's
as
in
a whole,
Germany.
aren't we?
That's in
No,
Germany.
no. What we're not opening the market. We're in a single market. We're not. You know, we're in a
You're
single
saying
market. It's
restricted
here
in
anyway.
this
It's been
country thus
restricted.
far, so
Yeah.
you're looking to end that restriction.
Correct.
Yeah.
When-
I think
it-
what has been forgotten is that every organisation that wants to something like boxing, government boxing, they have a duty of care.
Yeah.
And that duty of care could lead to a manslaughter charge or being responded harm. So therefore, there are in place certain things that would stop the cowboys coming in.
That's right.
So, you know,
Well, no.
I just don't understand why everybody thinks the border control has the only duty and the only honour to govern boxing properly. I formed the National Boxing Council. I took on the British Boxing Border Control and they threw the towel in. Why? Because I did everything that they did, only better.
And that's what competition does.
Absolutely. When I started off, we were called cowboys, we were called pirates, we were called everything by the media. We ignored it. And we were wondering if we did our work. And they threw the towel in. I never threw the towel in.
It will ultimately work or it won't it?
Absolutely.
Either at the end of the day, the British
Absolutely.
Boxing Board of Control are going to be the preferred
Absolutely.
provider,
It cost the border control
or it won't.
£1 million when they were showing a lack of care, which I think is care. So anybody that comes in like that, that's what they should be told.
Robert?
Question. Looking at what everyone is saying, has the British Boxing Board of Control demonstrated an ability to work with more than one governing body, several governing bodies in other territories?
Problem is, of course, it's not really within their interest to engage because in doing so you're then effectively allowing somebody else in to the jurisdiction of which you believe, as they do, exclusive right to. At the end of the day, let's be quite clear, the board makes its money by the licensing that it puts out. And on that basis, they do not want to allow other bodies into this jurisdiction for that reason.
That's not actually my question to begin with. My question is that if we go to a foreign territory such as Germany,
Yeah.
will the board work with more than, and there are five, let's say 5 governing bodies in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Will the Board of Control work with those 5 governing bodies in Germany?
Interestingly,
If they're of the same quality?
actually,
I'm asking the question pointedly
Mm.
because I know the answer. And the answer is they won't.
No.
but they
and the
do.
reason they won't is because they will only work
But they
with
do.
one body
Yeah.
per country.
That's right.
But they do. They work with the BDB, which is the EBU member in Germany, and they work with Austria, that operates
In Germany.
in Germany
Mm.
with Sauerland.
Well, no,
So-
we know, yeah, but no, that's not, actually, that's an answer to a different question. But my question was, which I've answered, I posed the question and answered it.
The EB,
But the point is, the way the board works through the EBU would mean if they worked with the BDB, which is the authorised body within Germany, but the GBA was better, they would still only work with the BDB within Germany.
because-
They will then work with Austria because they look at Austria as the Austrian Federation in Austria, even though the Austrian Federation works in
Germany and Denmark.
Germany.
And
I
Denmark.
know personally as a promoter who's put shows on in Europe, in the Czech Republic, I did a show in the Czech Republic 1 month with the Czech governing body, and the next month I did a show in the Czech Republic with the Austrian Federation. Both were happy, and both were successful and acceptable. The issue really is, if it works in Germany, if it works in Austria, if it works in the Czech Republic, why is it not safely? Why does it not work, or why can it not work here in the UK?
Well, you're right, there's absolutely no reason why it can't. And that is what we're going for. And in the event that there are regulatory bodies on these shores that people aren't happy with, they won't work with them. But there will be a vast more number of regulatory bodies that people want to work with. And in turn, the board will see licence holders going to new regulatory bodies, and the only response by the board there in that position is to revise their position and offer a service that entices people back. Because if they don't, they will find their membership shrink.
I have another real question which I really don't understand and I really want to know. This whole situation has been going on a long time. Maybe from a lawyer's perspective, this is the way of the world. But from my perspective, when, as a member of the boxing community, can we expect a resolution and an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think you will find that these proceedings will be issued shortly, and the resolution of those proceedings, dependent upon how quickly the courts can list the matter, will certainly be, we would imagine, at some point before the end of the year at the very latest.
I think we need to narrow the situation. The High Court is usually the arena when two sets of lawyers disagree.
Mm.
This is not the situation, mate. What the situation is here is that is this in contravention of the European law? As simple as that.
Well,
All this extra about worrying about how good
no, you're absolutely right. That is the case, but you have to give the background for the flavour as well. But the simple question is, do these rules comply with the competition law rules that are in this country?
And obviously,
And that's it.
But irrespective of what is being said here, if it contravenes a law, end of story.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, our position is that they are, of course, unlawful.
Of course.
But I'm
Yeah,
sure the board will
after-
find lawyers that say
after
otherwise,
that
because that's the way of the world.
After that judgment, then we need all these discussions. But first and foremost, if you break the law, end of story.
Yeah. But I think these discussions will carry on, whether or not we're having them or
Yeah,
not.
they will. But at the end of the
So
day,
it's important just to try and give some focus on the discussions.
After the judgment is made, and before we go into court, surely lawyers can look at this and say, yes, this is a contravention or it's not.
Problem is that the board can't back down, can they? Because if they're wrong, then that's that.
Well,
So we're going to have to go to court to get a ruling.
Do we need a governing body that refuses to honour what the law says?
Well, no. The board's position, of course, is they're not breaking the law. They're not unlawful.
That may be their view, but it goes
But-
outside of their view.
It does, and that's why we have to go to court, of course.
Well, it's
And that's what we're doing.
Isn't necessarily so much money to be spent going into court?
It's unavoidable.
And you must
Yeah, I don't think
understand
there's any
that the
choice
court
in
is
that,
spending
yeah.
not their money. They're spending the money of their license.
We would, of course, we've presented our position in such a way that we're convinced our argument will be successful. If the board wish to drop hands, then that's for the board to do, but they're not going to, are they? So we're going to have to go to court.
The current situation is such that the British Boxing Board of Control see this as a threat to their very existence.
Mm.
As a result of them seeing this as a threat to their very existence, they are going to fight tooth and nail in any way they possibly can to resist the action. I mean, that's as I see it from an outsider.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Now, there's always stages along the way, but that's exactly it. Sorry.
I have one question. I'll say this with no agenda whatsoever. You talked earlier about a number of disgruntled licence holders.
Yeah.
Is there any verification of that? Because obviously there's only a handful of licence holders here.
Well, this wasn't for licence holders.
This wasn't. This wasn't
I'm not
for
saying
licence holders.
They refused to turn up.
But
I think
do you
I
want
believe
me
you
to?
could-
Do you want me to get them to contact you
What, individually?
individually?
Well, no, but maybe some sort of open letter signed by a number of licence holders would
Yeah, I
strengthen
can
your
tell you, I
case.
can tell you that they're,
Oh, yeah,
and I'm,
that's fair.
Just an idea.
The reality is, of course, if
we
we
boxing news, why don't you put it in there and people look at license holders that read your
Because, yeah, but
Danny, to
We're-
save the hounding,
we're
the reality is, of
impartial.
course,
If we listen to Bruce, and Bruce
Sorry,
is
sir.
making a strong case,
Yeah.
and if there are if there's a groundswell of opinion behind it among licence holders, which I've got no reason to disbelieve, then let's.
I think the answer is the proof will sort of be in the pudding. Because we can be right legally, which will mean that the board's rules are unlawful.
Sure.
But the next stage, of course, is when other regulatory bodies come in. If it's the case that other regulatory bodies enter these shores and no licence holders are interested at all, then the
Well, I
board,
agree.
then the board themselves
I
have
just
won.
think if we're going to say there's
No,
no
no,
licence
but
for licence
Danny,
holders,
though, there is a, this is one of the,
license holders now in the UK.
What you can't have, of course, are licence holders at the moment publicly speaking against the board because they're worried about what the repercussions will be.
I think there's much sanction they can give against people just for saying we're not happy with the current status quo.
Danny,
I think they'd certainly try.
Sorry.
From what we've seen in these proceedings, I wouldn't be surprised by anything the board chooses to do.
But again, there's a generalisation. If one person is prejudiced by someone breaking the law, that's sufficient grounds.
yeah, we're not,
We're not
there's
talking
two
about
separate
whether
issues.
this is
No, no,
grounds for that. It's-
So, Danny,
I've got no argument with that.
There is two issues relating to exactly what you said, as far as I'm concerned. There are two issues. One, you've asked, are there licence holders who are, what is the strength of the licence holders' views on this matter?
Responding to
Yeah, no, I understand the question. I want to,
Yeah.
there is an issue in determining what that is, because a number of licence holders are concerned that if they do demonstrate that they are for the action, they lose their licences or get punished as a result of it. No, and that's factual. I can assure you that is factual. I know, and I'm not including myself in this, but I know of a number of licence holders who would side with Bruce and would put on GBA shows tomorrow if they didn't think they would lose their licences or be fined. The proof of the matter is that the people at that end of the table have been fined. Jim Evans has been fined a significant sum of money by the board for so doing this. Bruce has had his licence suspended. Not suspended, taken away
withdrawn.
as a result of this. So the point is, there is
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are, I can tell you, there are more than
Right.
20 licence holders.
They haven't had their licences taken away for saying they're disgruntled with the board and they want to change. They've had them taken away for a particular
No, but I can tell you more than this.
But Danny-
The board,
there is a
no,
distinction.
the
there.
board is
The board
very,
will make
no,
that
no,
awkward.
the board is very well aware that there is a significant groundswell of opinion that people are unhappy, and the reason I can prove that is that when all the regulations were changed a few years ago, there were meetings around the country that resulted in licence holders being appointed as non-voting representatives to the area councils. And that was done as a result of the licence holders being unhappy and concerned. We know that's factual because I'm one of the representatives of the licence
you're saying-
holders at the southern
You're
area.
saying, calm down, Rob.
Yeah,
I'm not angry.
calm down.
I'm not angry, I'm emotional, I'm not angry then.
You're just saying that, but now 3 years later on from that, you're saying there's still dysfunction, which is fine. I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
But I'm not wrong to ask for verification.
No, you're not.
you're
But I-
not.
no, but I think the answer.
Dan, it's a bit sorry, I know, is it okay? for me?
Carry on.
I know that, this is like our conversation we had over coffee that year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Um,
At least you paid it.
this time it's for free. No, I fully accept your point, but it's a bit like the discussion I heard this morning on the radio about in and out of the EU. People saying, well, they're using different statistics, and which are the correct statistics. It isn't verifiable, but there is a groundswell, a definite groundswell of licence holders who are dissatisfied. Are they dissatisfied to the point of view that they're going to walk away? No, because there is no alternative. And when you say, well, what does that mean, a groundswell? I would say there are 20 promoters who would love to
Do
have
something.
Explore the option of
it's
alternative.
not
But
necessarily
Danny,
even to explore.
excuse me.
Again, being open with you, from my perspective, I would like the board to reform and not have to do anything else. If the board would reform, I would be delighted, forgive me, gentlemen, at the top of this table, I'm staying where I am.
Well,
If the board
Well, no, that's of course, that's of course one of the end results that
but
many
Danny,
would be happy with.
what you have to understand is, we're doing this because, a load of us got fined. I have my licence revoked. I want my licence back. I don't want to leave the Boxing Board of Control. I think the Boxing Board of Control, in the main, do a very good job. But I have a right to do other things, as does every other citizen in the UK has a right to participate in the single market. And well, and that's what we're talking about. No, but that's what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is me having a manager's licence with the Board of Control, managing professional boxers who want to be with the Boxing Board of Control, or if they want to be with the GBA, being able to work with the GBA, run GBA shows or Board of Control shows. And that's a right that I've got. The board don't recognise that right, so I want to reinforce it.
I understand. My question is about how much support you had in
Yeah.
this from the promoters.
Nobody has phoned me up and said, Bruce, you're a bloody nuisance, stop it. Not even board officials.
Yeah, I was going to say,
On that sole premise of what you just now stated, then it makes this case absolutely right.
Well, that's
Well, we certainly hope so. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today.
and let me say, but let me say, absolutely, I don't think this will destroy the board. I think the board needs to change, and I think this is the only way to get it changed. I think it'll be better for it, and I don't think it'll go out of business.
Well, the
That's it.
alternative for the board, of course, is to revise its position.
Yeah.
And if it does that, and people are happy with that, then they'll be offering a service that many others will be offering. But the board have the advantage, of course, as they always have done, that they've been offering that service for so long that people will just stick with what's tried and tested, potentially.
yeah, but we've got 8 switched over already. We've got 8 promoters doing
It's
NBC shows. You've got 2
There you go.
promoters
It's a
doing
bit like the
GBA
train
shows.
service. It had just been National Rail. Now, where would we be?
Is there a minimum position from the board if they were to reform and revise their opinions that you would accept?
Well, I think we've been quite clear with the board that as long as we're in a position whereby we can engage and use other regulatory bodies, then that would be the
No.
position.
A lot of people say the board should be a government body, appointed by government. It's not. If it was, that I would welcome that, because it would mean it would have to adhere to the law. All I want the board to do is to adhere to the law. That's it. Nothing else. They don't have to do anything else.
But Bruce, the fact that you raise that it's a breach of your human rights or legal
Yeah.
rights, that ends everything.
Statutory rights.
Well, absolutely. Like all the other things we're discussing here, that only come if there is any opposition to the board. We don't know there is one. There'll be one yet, probably.
Well, I think it's right to have the conversation along the way, because people want to know what it is that we're doing.
But first of all, we must have the premise. The premise is that they are breaking the law, the European Union law. So if that's the case,
It's
what comes
unlawful.
after that puts the board in the same position as anybody else coming
Yeah.
along.
No,
They
it,
have to state their case and make their case good.
we are of course being speculative, but at the same time we can use, by looking over to the shores, what happens on in other countries.
That may be so, but at the end of the day, if it gets into the High Court, if it's a breach of Bruce's legal rights, then they're end of the lesson.
But that's right.
Well,
That's exactly it.
No one's
So
disagreeing.
But
with
we're not
that.
disputing that because that's the basis
We're
of
all
the
on the same
proceedings.
page on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Once we're on that page, what comes thereafter?
But it's natural to speculate on what this could mean and the precedent it will set.
Yes.
You don't know. You might get somebody like, I don't know, the Dragons. They might want to come in and take over boxing with all their money and all their expertise.
Possibly.
You're going to try and say you can't do it. You don't understand boxing.
But the object.
I think we can look at what happens
Hey,
elsewhere
Tony,
and just
the
use
object-
that.
What is irrefutable is that boxing, professional boxing in this country, is a broken business model.
Mm.
The biggest promoter in this country over the last decade has put 2 companies into liquidation with £12 million worth of creditors. So it can't be a proper business model,
Exactly.
and it's not. And professional boxing in law is an economic activity, not a sport.
And we have the case today where Cleverly is signing with another promoter. The promoter that is leaving threatens to sue. And that would not happen if the board of control.
It's
we
not-
can't really talk about that
Not-
here.
not- it's-
Certainly,
not
it
this bit
puts
of it.
me in
One-
an incredibly
this bit.
uncomfortable
One
position.
legal
Yeah,
battle
yeah,
at a time.
That's
Yeah.
nothing to do. We can't talk
No.
about that here because it puts everyone who's a lawyer in this room in an uncomfortable position because it's nothing to do with us.
Yeah,
But it proves the limitations of the board.
yeah.
Well, yeah.
No comment?
No. Does it?
Probably the safest response.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Does anybody want to have any other time with us? We're happy to talk to you, do anything else? No.